I mean, the general point I was trying to make about the Requiem is that I feel awkward even saying it. I didn't really want the research to come down this way because there's so many weird ways people take it. But Mozart knew he was being poisoned, and he made a choice for generations, for our generation, for future generations, you know, what he was going to leave at that point. And it has nothing to do with any bogus story about a mysterious stranger and delivering the Requiem. I'll say as a side note, I mean, the commission for the Requiem came from a guy who ran a mining operation. I think his name was Balsek, about 30 miles out of Vienna. And he had a business office in Vienna. And the guy who ran the business office was in Mozart circles, actually close to a friend of Mozart's, who probably suggested, you know, that this Count Balsek stop hiring also runs to write music for him, which he had a habit of doing. He would hire people to, you know, he's a nice guy, but he liked having composers compose music, which he would then pass off as his own at his little quartet sessions at his house. If you're a count, you could do that. But so the friend probably said, you know, I can't prove it, but it was a very natural course of events that could have accounted for how the commission came to Mozart. So that's, there's no spooky thing here. It's just literally Mozart in September of 1791 was the leading political figure in Europe, surpassing Lafayette at that point. And partly because of something I do want to spend a little time on. What was happening with the Magic Flute, the opera that he was wildly successful in Vienna among the German-speaking population. On this question that if you can have, if people are really serfs and just trained animals, they really cannot experience love in any form, you know, and therefore, or if you're saying, well, they're just serfs and they just have a moment where they get to have some love, it's like saying they get to have some church on Sunday. It's not the case. If people can actually feel something universal about some other person, they're capable of being educated to rule. They have what it takes to be educated to rule. And the Magic Flute put that thing so powerfully. We'll come back to that. So that's what I'd like to get across in terms of, so then Mozart's expression that to his wife in 3rd or 4th week of October, and 6 weeks before he died, that he was being poisoned, it doesn't have to be the ravings of a madman. Mozart knew what he was doing, and all his actions for the previous, documentable, the previous 10 years are pretty exciting in that regard. So I mean to just go through a little, not quite as fast a treatment of some of the points along the way. But what I did not say about the beginning, 1781 is when Mozart comes to Vienna. And there's a big fight around not just the emperor, but every court in Europe about the American Revolution. And you won't find it written up too much, but it's the case. When I say American Revolution, the policies of the American Revolution, whether we can continue, as the Rostro puts it, you know, in the Magic Flute, whether you continue having the brotherhood the way it's been run, or whether or not, in fact, it has to be a man and a woman that rules it jointly. It's not a trivial matter. It's not a woman's rights thing either. And this is sort of an issue. This is really brought to a head in October with the Yorktown victory in October 1781, which the news reaches Europe in about 3 weeks later, and it's pretty shocking. That same October 19th, on the surrender of Cornwallis's army, it just happens, it's just an accident, but Mozart's Emperor Joseph II issues his edicts of toleration for the Protestants and the Jews. He's been doing a series of reforms in 1781 and 82 involving what I said about freeing the serfs. The key figure one of the key figures, sort of the Benjamin Franklin figure in Vienna, is a fellow named Ignaz von Born, B-O-R-N, who Joseph II, who's the model for Zoroastro, who's the head of a particular Freemasonic lodge, who's a mineralogist, a metallurgist, an inventor, a geologist. He's given major public honors by Joseph II for his work in metallurgy and his contribution to the state in those works. I guess I should stop on, when I say Freemasons, most of it's harmless, some of it's evil, and one or two identifiable parts of it, having really nothing to do with Freemasonry, is what Mozart's involved with. My German won't do this very well, but zur wahren Eintracht, the true path, is the particular group that Mozart joins with. And it's just an American Revolution group. It's a little bit off the side, but everything if you ever heard this stuff about the Illuminati, that's just a bunch of crap from a group run by Adam Weishaupt in 1770, which was said to be started in 1776 by the Bavarian State Police, who wanted it to be started in 1776, and this comes up in 1784. They arrest this poor schmuck and accuse him of all sorts of things, and it becomes a something to push in the faces of the courts of Europe that the American Revolution is really out just to cut off the heads of kings, and it's a secret, pagan, atheistic operation. There was nothing much to it. It was the Bavarian State Police who made it a big issue in this period right before Figaro. And this is what Joseph was having to deal with. Joseph, in the period from, actually I'm getting ahead of myself on that, so we'll come back to that. So just in 1781-82, the news of Yorktown has excited Europe. Mozart has joined what John Sigurdsson referred to as Baron von Swieten seminars, where they're getting intense work on Johann Sebastian Bach's works. Baron von Swieten is a minister. He's Minister of Education, which is an important issue at the time because you can trace the American Revolution faction as the group that's not allowing the Jesuits to run the education anymore. You now need educated citizenry, serious education, people who can learn science, and that's not what was going on underneath the Jesuits. So the Jesuits had been banned in 1773. The Pope who banned them died the next year suspiciously. This jumps ahead of the story again. I'm going to do this all evening. But Karl Mozart, one of the main things about the question of Mozart's assassination is the son, Karl Mozart, says many years later, after Mozart's dead, that his father died the same way Pope Ganganelli died, which is Clement XIV, the Pope who banned the Jesuits. Which, whatever the medical evidence involved in it, that's not the point. It's just a famous whispered case among Republicans that the Jesuits got the Pope who banned them. And Schiller has some interesting references to this in The Ghost Seer. So trying to keep on point here. That would be a struggle. It's an important matter. Baron von Swieten is an important post on education if you're going to build up something approximating a republic, even if it's under a king or an emperor. Joseph II has Mozart appointed to do this abduction from the Seraglio. It's for the occasion, an opera from a previous play. It's for the occasion of the, who's the Russian prince? Paul or? Who's the empress name? Catherine? Catherine. The son of Paul, I think is his name. He's on one of these tours of Europe, and he's partly involved in trying to wangle, in 1782, whether it's him personally or the advisors around him, they're trying to forget the American Revolution, let's go back to business as usual, it's time to fight the Turks. Just empire stuff. It was a senseless war to try to get Russia and Austria to join together to fight the Turks. They're religious overtones. 1783 was going to be the 100th anniversary of the massive, I forget actually who won. Is it Lepanto?
Yeah, Lepanto.
Lepanto in 1683. Oh, I got a church history guy here. Who won that one?
Spanish one, isn't it?
All right. So there's going to be a big 100-year commemoration with a lot of anti-Arab stuff going on. So Mozart changing the end of the opera to make the Pasha the most Christian person on the scene is really, it warranted all the rioting that went on in the opera house, not in the town in general, as far as I know. And the change, maybe going, there's a similar story in Berlin, in the Prussian court, in Paris. There's probably Stockholm, I just don't know all the other. I know in detail, in Paris, Berlin, and Vienna, it's absolutely the case that the American Revolution in the fall, winter of 1781 and the spring of 1782, extraordinary steps were being taken, openings being given on the question of it's time to really be sane and get some decent policies. Moses Mendelssohn's the figure mainly attached to this in Berlin, and the reason I just thought about it was because Mozart in Vienna is around some of Mendelssohn's circles in Vienna. Mendelssohn's, part of the reforms that Joseph did in October 19th of 1781 was that Jews and Protestants could be citizens in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but they had to, and run their own schools, but they had to meet certain standards, and that included learning German. Mendelssohn's German translation of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, became the major center point of the Jewish communities in the Austro-Hungarian Empire that wanted to go support what the emperor was doing and push and saw hope and progress in this. And in Vienna in particular, an advisor to Joseph II, a man named Sonnenfels, grandson of a rabbi, but he was a Christian, was the guy who authored these reforms. This sort of becomes important because the emperor assigns his close aide, the emperor's aide, Gunther, to work with Mozart in the forming up of this opera, The Abduction from the Seraglio. 3 weeks before the opera is supposed to open, so the ending of the opera, the change is very much modeled on sort of the ending that Lessing had done, a friend of Mendelssohn's, the writer Lessing, and a couple years earlier in his writing the Nathan the Wise about a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim. I won't go through that, but it's one of these sort of surprise things which usefully upsets people's prejudices. And Mozart, we know, had Mendelssohn's Phaedon work. He was living in the Arnstein household in Vienna, a Jewish household, and the Arnsteins were from the, Mrs. Arnstein was from Berlin, from the famous Aeschylus family of collaborators of Moses Mendelssohn, and she brought the works down. So this whole question of re-looking at Christians and Jews and Muslims from a higher standpoint was very much wrapped up in whether you could do something better than the old imperial blood vendettas and other things. Good. So having said that,
what did you say about what did Mozart do with the Phaedon?
We just know that he had his copy of the Phaedon from the Aeschylus daughter, the Arnstein, from the family that he was living with during the time that he was getting the balls to flip the ending.
When did Mendelssohn publish the Phaedon?
1769.
Okay.
I think, or 1770. What's that?
Mozart.
Mozart had a copy. Yeah. From, hand delivered from a collaborator of Mendelssohn. This will come together. That's right. So Gunther is the aide to the emperor working with Mozart 3 weeks before the opera is supposed to open for the Grand Duke Paul's visit, and to upset their whole, go after, go after the Turks policy. Mozart and Gunther are meeting, having a long dinner, evening meeting The next morning, Gunther is arrested by the secret police. The emperor's right-hand man is arrested the morning after the meeting with Mozart, like June 28th of 1782, and the opera's opening up in the middle of July. Also arrested is his mistress, Eleanor Aeschylus, from the same grouping as the Arnsteins and the Mendelssohn crowd. The charge is they're Prussian spies, which really meant almost nothing. Austria and Prussia fought a war. Had done some fighting, so, but they just threw a charge out. A Prussian spy, it was all malarkey. But what it really meant is they're the agents of Moses Mendelssohn here in Vienna. That's what it meant. Gunther was in jail was in prison for several months. He was gotten out. This becomes jumping ahead again, but the only reason we know these stories, it was all in the secret police files, what happened, until in 1790 when Joseph II dies and his brother succeeds him, Leopold, the one that the Clemenza de Tito is done for. He fires the head of the secret police, the guy who had all these files, and opens up this stuff and investigates what the hell messed up my brother. And that's the only reason we know some of these stories about this. It would have been buried like so many other stories we don't know about. So this very tense situation, agitated situation at the opera, is done. The problem is Joseph II never has such personal workings with Mozart again. You know, it's his loss. There were projects they collaborated on, but never the right-hand man of the emperor meeting with Mozart over these things. And that's what was lost. And also the German language theater, which was a project Joseph II had started because of, in a discussion with Lessing a few years ago, the point about using the theater to prepare a population, to ennoble them, get them out of the soap opera vaudeville stuff that was going on. And so he had established a German National Theater, and this Mozart's opera was part of showing you could sing in German, you could have ennobled concepts, and it would be popular. People would be connected to something, would be taken to a higher level. And it was largely successful. It was noticed by the enemy. And they closed down the German language theater, and you know, Joseph goes along with this stuff as a bunch of Venetian agents in his, this is the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Joseph II, it wasn't all perfect, but he was trying his best to make this thing have a future. And he had some same type of enemies we have today around there. And the head of the opera company, what's his name, Rosenberg? I'm forgetting a lot of these names. My wife actually took my notes with me, with her back, and called me up. And anyhow, it's not that. There was a guy, a Venetian agent, Orsini-Rosenberg, Orsini-Rosenberg, who was the emperor's advisor on cultural matters in Vienna, and they sort of closed down the German language theater and said, you know, let them get crap, and we'll just have the Italian theater for our people here. Enough on that. So that just Mozart was known from early on in Vienna with these capabilities and this attitude. You can ask questions about those two. We'll just jump ahead. There's some interesting details not worth going into now.
David, I have a question.
Yeah.
Is this the point at which he's also working with Wieland on the German project, or is that later?
Wieland comes in and out. I mean,
yeah, I'm just
the
talking
Magic
about
Flute collaboration with Wieland, and there's some interesting stuff in this period with, you're probably right. I mean, Schikaneder Theater, which went to Salzburg in 1780 and played Shakespeare,
right,
is doing a lot of Wieland performances of his plays. And you know, Mozart writes letters during this period, 82, 83. Oh, what I would give for a true German patriot, to push the German language project. So Wieland is very much part of that, at least through Schikaneder. And Schikaneder is in and out of Vienna and in touch with Mozart. He's maybe a goofball part of the time, but he's a serious person. Schikaneder is the guy who puts on the Magic Flute in 1791. If you go to Google or whatever else, you'll just get some idea. He's a loosey-goosey shyster. He likes to make money and do whatever's popular, you know. But he put on Shakespeare, put on a play, something with America in its title in 1779, My Cousin in America or something like that. I don't know what's all that's about. I've never seen that play. So this is basically 81 to 83. Now by 85, Joseph II, his when I was picking up that Masonic thing I dropped, see, I am picking up some of the things along the way. Joseph's the way of dealing with what these retrograde reactionary groupings are doing in his government, including the next door, the Bavarian State Police, arresting this poor schmuck and starting to scare all the courts of Europe that you got to really batten down the hatches because any, meaning all of Joseph's reforms, should not be allowed. You know, I mean, Joseph personally attended some of the salons that Mozart and Lessing attended in 81, 82, 83. You know, there was interchange of these things, and anyhow, so the Joseph, without going into more about the Illuminati thing, Joseph's way of responding to it was, all right, we're just going to regulate. We're going to have no below ground Masonic groups are allowed. Everything will be above ground. We'll have 3 major mother Masonic groupings, and they'll be open and public. And it's basically saying, you want open public discussion, that's fine. And there's a lot of censorship. Baron Speen was also in charge of the censorship, and they had a massive amount of publications going on, you know, of some of it goofy, so, but just you take your chances and you get people to actually discuss ideas and discuss plays and discuss things. And these lodges were part of where they attended. You could have secular discussions, and not all within the Catholic Church. And that was, as far as I can tell, pretty successful. But Joseph II more and more has got a rear guard battle. I can just tell you, by 1786, they've destroyed the savings and loans. There's some big usury operation that the court's into and never tracked down. It's probably the same, or very similar to what's happening in France at the same time, where the Venetian and Swiss and London, Geneva, London, and Venetian speculators have cornered the grain markets and just running these shortages on people. It runs differently in different places. You can probably do a look at the United States in 1784, 85, and 86 before the Constitutional Convention and look how they were probably screwing around here. Is the case. It's just the United States that we actually did what had to be done and formed 1787 with the Constitutional Convention and met the challenge. Joseph II, by 1786, the secret police guy is now made, his name is Anton Pergin, Count Anton Pergin, P-E-R-G-E-N, and my candidate for the guy who would have run the assassination of Mozart. He's made the, where no other minister can ask him of any, all ministers can ask other ministers in the cabinet for reports, and he's the only one. Nobody can ask him anything. He can only report to the emperor, which means he's running games on the emperor and with nobody to check him, make a check. And he's elevated to that status, more equal than all the other equals in 1786. So you just got, I think that's a watershed point. In 1785 is when the project of the second opera, the Marriage of Figaro, comes up. What I characterize it as is sort of, you know, people who have agreed in principle to the reforms, but psychologically are fascist. They're who they were, and they committed not to change. And all the battles and the stories you can read about, the attempt to set up free schools in the South after the Civil War, and you know, what the KKK was founded to stop. You know, it's the similar fight, and all the Denise Henderson, I guess, wrote some of these stories on these. Was she the one who wrote up how to use the prison labor?
On the what?
That was Bill Salisbury.
Oh, Bill? Okay, thank you. How they reasserted slavery just by prison labor,
like
getting
chain
people
gang?
arrested.
Chain
Yeah,
gang.
yeah, but getting people arrested for all sorts of stuff, with the policy to create a labor pool that had no more head rights. They were just so they had slavery was illegal, but it looked the same in the 1870s, 80s. and Joseph had these problems, and so the Marriage of Figaro is a play by a fellow named Beaumarchais. Beaumarchais was the key fellow getting weapons to the United States in 1775 to 1778 when France had not officially joined the war. Beaumarchais would have been disowned by the French court. The French court was more for the American Revolution for principled reasons than the historians will say. People just say it was simply because they didn't like, it was an imperial thing between France and Britain, and they wanted to get back at England for tit for tat for what they did in the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War, which it ended in 1763. There's certain people in France who thought that way, but Beaumarchais was sent out as the agent to make sure America stayed in the fight and grew in the fight, so in France they could win the fight, the political fight, to get the commitment to weigh in heavy. I am jumping ahead, but I was just going to say it. In 1780, there's a lot of confusing things in my mind about French politics. I can never really figure it out. But one of the clearest things to me is in the winter of 1780, they fire Germain de Staël's father, Necker. Yeah, they fire the finance minister, the schmuck who's saying, "Oh, you got debts from the American Revolution, and it's time to cut back. We've got to do budget cutting now." They fired him, and Marie Antoinette was very important in this. And that's why they decided that winter to make the naval deployment, which we all know as Yorktown. They would never before do we have enough of a French naval deployment to stop the British Navy from being the one that ran things. You know, they could, you know, and it's just not, I just don't, including our organization, I don't think we've talked enough about that. You plan wars in the winter and you go out and send your campaigns out at that time. And that's when that plan was made. And so they boldly went ahead. They made an Entschlossen type of decision, say, fuck the financial problems. This is more important. So anybody who says by my reasoning, it's a mystery why they failed in the negotiations after the war. Because I don't think anybody can say they were just always out to lunch. There was, at least some time, a clear idea of what the fight was about. Why did I say all that? Beaumarchais in 1775 is out on his own. You know, he's officially not supposed to be doing all the stuff he's doing. Lafayette is from the famous Noailles family, which are all ministers, and they're all for the American Revolution. They're the most healthy part around Louis the 16th, around the court. And they sent his grandson. You know, he didn't just run off by himself. It was known by everybody in France that when he went over to fight, before France had weighed in on the war, that this was a whole big established part of the French court. But Beaumarchais wrote this play in this situation, The Marriage of Figaro. In France, it worked that, you know, he's out there and he's taking the gamble, the risk, and he doesn't really know what's in the hearts of the French court. Some of them are, including the king. I mean, they're playing with him. So he writes a play that works very well as a play, the same way Mozart did later with the opera. You put a sex farce up on stage. What's really in your heart? There's a lot of other things in the opera and the play, but the core of it is, I'm a liberal. I've given up the right to the first night, you know. But you see, the guy spends the whole rest of the opera trying to reassert the right. That's, you know, he hasn't changed on the inside, and I think just find it totally precise in terms of the type of intervention you'd want to have in Vienna in 1785. There's a whole other part of that we can get to later if we have time, but that Marie Antoinette won a big fight in France between 81 and 84 to finally get the play performed. Part of France's problem is they didn't win this fight earlier, and that she won the fight is the reason why I think she was targeted with the Queen's Necklace affair. The whole, she never said let them eat cake. Really? No, that was the whole. We'll cover that one later. So to stay on Mozart.
You can remember all that stuff later.
What's that?
I can remember all that later.
You're going to remind me. Basically, nobody's interested unless they bring it up again, right? Yeah, so it's guaranteed it works. I may remember it. I don't know. So the Figaro is banned as a play in Peregrine has the play banned, and Joseph may be in agreement with him on this. in January of 1785. There's a whole other class some other time about this dissonant quartet we've just done, which is the same time, January, February of 1785, where Mozart has been, by some shenanigans of a police agent within the Freemasons, kept out of the Freemasonic group that he wants to be in, the Ignaz von Born group, and then they finally find that agent and kick him out. I may remember his name at a certain point. But in December of 1784, Mozart finally gets with the people he wants to be with there, Ignaz von Born's group, gets Haydn to join with him and gets him in on that group. And in January of 1785, they're pushing to have what Marie Antoinette had just won with the Marriage of Figaro in Paris done in Vienna. And it's in just a short few weeks. Mozart comes to the end of his 6 Haydn quartets, including the dissonant, for these people. That's who he's composed. That's who he wrote it for. That's who he got the psychological energy to complete a project that he'd been working on for several years, and he had not done one of those quartets for a year and a half, and he just finished off the last 3 real quickly, the last 3 of the 6, and that's who's playing in the quartet. It's 2 members of the lodge, plus Haydn and Mozart. That's, it's almost a no-brainer if historians want to just look at some of this stuff. So this is January, February of '85, and the band comes. There's supposed to, is it Schikaneder's group? I think it might be Schikaneder's group. The play troupe is supposed to put on a German language version of Marriage of Figaro in Paris, in Vienna, and 2 days before the curtain's supposed to open, the band is announced. And Mozart and Emmanuel de Ponte, the librettist, the one who's working with Mozart on this project, go to the emperor and try to work around and say, all right, well, we'll do it as an opera. And this is Italian, it's not the general population, but Joseph is happy to have this thing done, maybe not for the general population, but for the people, all the ones giving him trouble. And that's the interesting about that. It's not put on until the spring of 1786. It's when it's and Orsini Rosenberg is the jerk. Have you ever heard the stories about they took the dancers out and they have silence going on while the people are dancing on stage, and they took the music that Mozart wrote out? This is from this situation where Orsini Rosenberg had ripped out the pages of the score. And anyhow, these little. There's a lot of back and forth on this stuff, but it was relatively successful, and I maybe didn't give that idea this afternoon. I sort of said it was relatively successful, but there was in some sense some misfire. There's now a problem for Mozart and de Ponte to figure out, which was Joseph really wasn't plunging ahead. He had the weaponry to go after his aristocrats. He was working with them to have that done, but this they took 6 to 9 months to get the opera written and done and up on stage with all these delays going on. And the delays won the day. And by the time the actual opera was going on, Joseph was more on, this is 1786 now, spring of May or something like that of 1786. And Mozart and de Ponte have to think, well, they did their best. Why is their emperor, what misfired? And Mozart's plan after that point is, all right, I'm going to England. They give a lot of money for musicians. I'm moving out of Vienna. This thing's dead. It's not going to happen. And the opera becomes wildly successful in Prague, which is part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And later in 1786, they won't let it alone, and they demand Mozart come to Prague, which he does, and he just loves, these guys are Republicans, left, right, and center, all over the place, saying, yeah, this is how you got to stick it to these oligarchs. And they're very happy about the situation. And this is the generation of the Don Giovanni play, opera, which I said I wasn't going to get into the dirty details this afternoon because of the family group. You guys look pretty crunchy, so we can do. Yeah, unshaven. I heard that. And to be blunt, there's a bunch of child pederasts, people who screw 9-year-olds. Casanova. It's not just he likes to sleep with a lot of women. This is just as perverse as you want it. It's just sadism in power. And De Ponte knows this, and Mozart knows this. And this young woman, her name was Kasperl, was the young whore being sent over to the emperor. The emperor had a lovely marriage as a young man. She died young, the empress, 20 years earlier. You know, and I don't think it's that big a deal. These guys hoard around all the time. But the question was whether or not, yeah, I'm not saying that's the only influence on the emperor that kept him from going after the aristocrats. There's a lot of things. But there's just these networks. And Joseph, to his credit, wants this play put on. He wants it first in Prague, not Vienna. But he does want it put on. He wants a vicious attack. And make no mistake about it, this is to go after the population. I'm not going to go into a long thing about Don Giovanni, but Giovanni is not the problem. I mean, he's just what he is. It's the people around him who, what do they facilitate? What's the terminology?
Enable?
The enablers. The characters in the opera who can't believe there's this level of evil, and they don't want to believe there's this level of evil. And they're not the worst people in the world. They really are people that the whole audience identifies with in the first half of the opera. And in the second half of the opera, you see, oh my God, they're so pathetically incompetent to deal with this. And I just hope there's not really that problem in the world I'm living in. You know, and as Lynn used to, you know, it's not really an opera. It's one of these things where people get in there and they start squirming and they say, oh my God, I'm not being entertained. I really want to get the hell out of here. You know, so the, that's the quick version. So the, that's really good.
It's funny, it's like Hamlet's, you know, catching the conscience of the king.
Yeah.
In one of these.
I think it is. So the, you know, it's a nasty situation in this 1786 in Vienna. They presume public executions as public spectacles. The biggest thing going on is to watch somebody get offed in public, which the Catholic Church had not allowed earlier. That's not something you didn't watch people die and go crazy over. I mean, it's as people are having economic problems, they're being bestialized by 1786. And Giovanni is premiered in the fall of 1787 in Prague. It's a wild success. You know, in the writing of it, there are a couple things I am skipping. In the writing of it, De Ponte, in 1786, it's known, there's a letter from, I forget her name, but a big whore in Vienna who's one of Casanova's women. Casanova is not living in Vienna. Casanova was not by description a Venetian agent. He was a paid Venetian agent. They you know, there's a whole other thing about Casanova. I wrote, it's up on the LaRouche pack if you want to look up some of those gory details. There's a year where his problem in figuring out whether he screwed a 9-year-old or an 11-year-old is that he mixed up the names, and the editors of the letters want to defend him, saying, oh no, it really wasn't the 9-year-old, it was the 11-year-old because he just mixed up the names of the two girls. And he meets the Pope a week later, you know, and gets the Order of the Golden Spur, and then he's getting an abortion for a nun a week later. You know, he just had a great year. You know, and this is, it's just it's a nightmare. So this guy was just a libido, and he wasn't that high level, but he was a useful agent at a certain point. And during the American Revolution, he was the guy who made his reputation supposedly escaping the big prison in Venice in the 1750s, and it was immediately appointed the head of the lottery in Paris in the total mess, and negotiating wild loans during the 7 Years' War for the French that was just getting him deeper and deeper into trouble. Why he had this position as a young man is just amazing. But then, during the American Revolution, he's back in Venice. He's now accepted back, and his reports are whether the French are, as part of their move toward America, are building up their navy around the Adriatic and as a force against Venice and other things. They're just very explicit war reports from an agent snooping around. And then he shows up and he moves to, in 1783, he moves to Vienna. He works for the Venetian ambassador, whose name is Foscarini. I'm pretty good at names tonight. Foscarini, who is the Venetian ambassador to Venice. And that's who he's employed by from 83 to 85. And he dies, Foscarini dies, and he's doing snooping around the emperor, doing weird things. It's a hilarious thing. But in 1786, he's now, for the rest of his life, his last 10, 15 years, he's up in the hills outside of Prague, about 50 miles, at the Volstein estate, I think it is. Volstein, at an estate. He's a librarian there, and that's where he's got time to write his memoirs that you get today. And then you get one of his lovers from Vienna, who's still there, reporting back to him about what his personnel are involved in, what they're doing. And De Ponte, the librettist, shows up, goes and confronts them, and she's complaining to, we know about this because she's complaining to Casanova, saying, "This dangerous De Ponte, you got to keep him away from here. Don't be talking to him. He's, he can't be trusted, and he's moralizing, and his, so don't share any secrets with him." And at the end of that letter, he says, "And by the way, poor Caspar, she's having such a good time with the emperor. She sees him very regularly, and I'm sure it's just French lessons, and I really don't know what coin she repays him." And this is just to tell Casanova that that's still ongoing. There's a lot more about that I don't know. But it's immediately after that they decide we're going to do this Giovanni thing. And whether it totally hit on target, there's just a lot I don't know about that. So just to skip ahead, it's wildly successful in Prague. The version of Prague is the one that they successfully put the screws on the population with the ending. They have the original ending, where you see the characters on stage make fools of themselves by, no, I didn't see anything. There's nothing going on here. And that's what's excised in the Vienna performance. That's not the only thing, but that was excised by Orsini Rosenberg in 1788, when it was supposed to be performed that spring in that winter between 1777 and 1778. That is supposed to now come to Vienna. The problem is now that Turkish war that they stopped back in 1782 has now broken out. Emperor Joseph is on the front fighting the Turks. He's not in Vienna. Everybody's running amok in Vienna, and Mozart does not, he's pretty much defeated. He does not have anybody in the court going to make this fight. So Rossini Rosenberg is just chopping this thing up. And the cuts, as far as I'm concerned, the cuts in the Vienna version of the Don Giovanni are just something Mozart never would have allowed. That's a whole long story about how that works. I think I wrote some of that stuff out. It would not have allowed if he had any way to prevent it. But it really, he wasn't the emperor. He was, who he was. The emperor is way at the front in 1788. He gets disease. 1/3 of his army gets disease. Typical thing, malaria and stuff like that. It never recovers his health in February of 1790. He's never a factor from then on. War is a disaster, as it's planned to be. So let's jump ahead. So 1790 so what's happened in 1789 is the famous French Revolution, July, 14th, something like that. And, the challenges put it all in the courts. There's a lot of American Republican sympathizers. In fact, in Philadelphia, maybe somebody knows this. What's the hall? I saw years ago all these paintings of the French Revolutionary guys who fought in the American Revolution in some museum in Philadelphia. Star took me to. Yeah, I think so, yeah. And you see 20, 30 people, and most of them, they die in 1792, 1793, 1794. And they're young men. They all died in the terror. That's who they were killing. And in 1789 and 1991, there's, they still, Lafayette's the head of them. And there's a lot of things I'm not going to, there's been arguments about whether the French population was ever prepared for a republic, and whether Lafayette's judgment that they were not prepared, therefore you had to cut deals with kings in 1789, 1991, but also when he's an old man in 1830. That's what Lafayette did. or whether or not you could take the fight to the population. That is what Mozart does, right or wrong. And you can say it really didn't work, because we had the worst Austro-Hungarian tyranny for the next 50 years, from 1790, coming out of the French Terror. You just had, under Emperor Franz, your classic, you know, frozen empire.
But just back up, you said, so the guys that fought over here were killed in the French Terror.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, but I wanted to say in 89, 90, 91, they were on the scene. And Lafayette was sort of the head. And these names I will not remember because I have a prejudice against remembering French names. Total incapacity to remember French names. But there were a bunch of them. And so there, I just mean to say, it's a messy situation, but it's conceivable France could have made a proper revolution. And by June or July of 1791, things have come to a head. It's really their turning point downwards. The king, under the influence of a lot of relatives around the courts of Europe, fled where he was being kept house prisoner in his castle, in his what's the place?
Bastille?
No. The fancy court that Louis XI.
Oh,
Versailles. Thank you. It's amazing what I will forget. And he flees, which is basically the sign. There's no middle ground anymore. And the courts of Europe plan to invade France. The French have their reaction. Everybody's got to hunker down and go cause war against all European civilization. And you can read all the stories. It's nobody's right. It's a lot of garbage, a lot of mess. So, but in Vienna, having set that stage, there's and I'm skipping over the Così fan tutti, which I quite frankly really don't know why it's written, and I have looked at it and I'm skipping over La Clemenza di Tito, where it's clear that the issue of clemency is a nice issue to put in front of an emperor. I really don't know the history well enough to figure out why. I have tried to look. I just don't know exactly why that's edgy. All the other ones I'm presenting to you, I think, are edgy. I think you've got an exact match between a judgment of the political strategic situation and what kind of cultural intervention you make in those cases. And I think if I ever figure that out about Così fan tutti and Clemenza, I'll come back and tell you more. So the Magic Flute, though, is really the first opera that I ever convinced myself worked this way. And it's you know, the question is, the population mature enough? They weren't in the Don Giovanni, you know. And he really went after them pretty hard. So he's not really going after the Italian-speaking anything. This is a German language. It opens up in September of 1791. It is, you know, I think I put a quote in that little Larouche thing from one of these counts who attends, and he's just pissed off at the crowds eating this stuff up. He's like, I always just the travelogue. Anyhow, so if you just focus in a little bit on the opera, there's a lot of things to say, but why does this old brotherhood, which you can think of it as the Catholic Church, you can think of it as Freemasonic groups, I don't care what you think the brotherhood is, but they're the ruling order, and they're relatively benign. They try to do the good things, possibly in better times, and they have to do large part of their stuff in secret because the population can't process all this stuff. I mean, people can characterize it some way differently, but that's whether it's a secret Masonic operation or whether it's, you know, whatever. So why would this guy decide that the future's got to be, we can't rule this way anymore? We have to have a man and a woman who love each other. Or you could just take it, it's a romantic little story. You know, that's nice. We're used to those sort of stories. But it's shocking at that point. You didn't have women be brought in as leaders of Masonic groups. You didn't have women brought in leaders of much of anything, including these brotherhoods. But it's not a feminist tract. It's about the trials that Tamino goes through, the prince. people know, anybody not know the opera? Okay. I'll describe a couple of things. Good, he has some courageous souls. But, so you have a guy in a strange land with a queen that runs things, and it's just your normal queen operation. Nobody knows how the economy works. Some guy catches birds, and he gets fed by the queen to catch birds for the queen, because she likes to have birds caught. And, you know, and then she shows a picture of her daughter who's captured by some mean guy. And he can have her if he just, you know, goes and saves her. So he knows this jerk who's got her captured is evil. That's the definition of evil. And so he gets to the to where she's being held in the neighboring kingdom, whatever, where Zoroaster rules, and he finds, wow, this is actually beautiful architecture and the art, and I wonder, you know, how's this guy evil? And they actually seems to be, by my measure, what a educated, cultured person should be. And there's some really great scenes about, you know, how he tries to, the education of Tamino as he runs up, and the audience, as they found out that what they think is evil is not evil, and what they got to think. So to join, so they're captured, but he now has to join their band, led by Zoroaster, their brotherhood, who rules this happy little kingdom of peasants. And so he has to go through 3 trials. And there's a lot of Masonic overtones in this thing. Ignaz von Born, the fellow I mentioned, had just passed away that summer. And they decided to do this, put this thing together really quite quickly. People who know it, I'm sure I'm skipping some stuff, so you think it's something important, you know, bring it up. But so the trials he goes through, I don't even actually remember the 3 trials, but part of it is being steadfast and silent, don't gossip. Women gossip, you know, so you don't gossip. And he's got a pal along with him, Papageno, who's a peasant. Nice guy, good-hearted guy, but, you know, and he falls for every trick in the 3 trials, you know. Oh, I love you, okay, I talk to you now. And, you know, so whatever senses are put in front of him, that's going to capture him, no matter what his intentions were before. Oh, I'll never do that again. And the next one, he just does it again. So the prince is going through these trials. And it is something in 1791, you know, I should say something else about this. Emperor Leopold is taken over in February, March of 1790, brother of Joseph. He fired the Count Anton Pergin, opened up the files. Unfortunately, about sometime a year later, by spring or summer of 1791, Count Peregrine's back in there. And within a few months, the emperor's dead. The emperor dies about 2 months after Mozart. And unlike Joseph, which probably died, the previous emperor, from actual physical problems, Leopold died suddenly of no obvious problems at all. And there's sort of a clean out during that fall and winter, the time that Mozart dies, including Baron von Swieten, the guy that was Mozart's biggest supporter throughout this period, was fired from his ministry post the same day Mozart died, December 5th, 1791. Also the same day that the Report of Manufactures came out by Alexander Hamilton. Interesting day. Somebody's composing some higher music. And in October, during this, Baron von Swieten's, a guy from his faction, a guy named Schleusnig, was the tutor to the Crown Prince, the guy who's going to succeed Leopold. Franz, the guy who became an asshole for 50 years. But he was being educated by Schleusnig, by Baron von Swieten's people, and he was fired, and he was cleaned out on the excuse that they're all Jacobins. Schleusnig wants the French revolutionists to come invade Vienna and take over, and he's educating the prince on this. And this is the level of this stuff going on. It's just pure, well, that's what's going on. Excuse me, when I say Emperor Franz was an asshole, let me clarify. One of Mozart's lodge brothers, an interesting fellow named Angelo von Solomon, an African diplomat of some sorts, I believe, in Vienna. Supposedly a great chess player or something like that also. Was a good friend of Mozart's. Emperor Franz had him stuffed and kept in his museum for the next 50 years. Yeah. So assholes, politest thing I can say about it. Had him stuffed and on display in a museum for the next 50 years. You know, this is... yeah.
Franz took over after Leopold Day?
Yeah, 1792 when he dies, he's the crown prince. And he's old. I'm not saying he was... he's probably... I don't know at what point he became... Everybody in Vienna became worse by 1794, 1795 because the terrors going on in Paris, there are nasty trials going on in Vienna. This is what Beethoven comes into when he comes into Vienna. These things called the Jacobin trials, and they're all the constitutional monarchists who were around Joseph. They're the farthest thing you can find. They're more conservative than Lafayette, you know, on this stuff. And they're being given 60-year prison sentences and executed and God knows what. And it's just hysteria. But then that's a couple years ahead. So in 17, so Mozart takes the fight to the population. He doesn't go to England. You know, it's not what happened earlier when he thinks that the leadership of his land is incapable. He doesn't fold his cards. He doesn't head out of the country. He says, "All right, I don't know how this thing ends up, but we're gonna fight." And then the decision's made to execute him. So let me leave it at that. That was an hour, and we got at least about a half hour for questions, I guess.
Well, what about the composition project?
The Requiem?
Well, there's the Requiem, but there's also his collaboration with the various people in the lodge in various compositional works.
Oh, the conferences he did for the lodge.
Yeah, the ones that he did, also the Philosopher's Stone, all the other things that happened.
I don't know what to tell you. He was very active with, you know, he was seen as. Let me answer a different way. This Count Peregrine at one point sent a phony letter into the lodge, as if it were coming from French Jacobins, saying, "All right, the revolution's on. You know, time to rise up and kill those. You know, kill them." And the leaders of that lodge handed over the letter to Peregrine. And we know this because Peregrine's notes, you know, say, you know, God damn it, they didn't bite on this thing. They handed me back the silly letter, you know. So the fact that Peregrine was targeting this particular group, I find that very important. Who's the guy that Mozart always borrowed money from lately? One of the Masonic brothers. Mr. X, we'll figure out, maybe remember his name. He was the guy that was the friend of who I think got the Requiem project for Mozart. He was the one who was friends of the guy who ran the business office for Count Balzac. Puchberg. Michael Puchberg. I'm done? I'm good. I'm good at the names. All right. The older I get, I've been forgetting a lot more names than I remember. So, you want to refocus?
No, just the point is that he obviously was collaborating with people who were writing music together with him. The Schickenator, of course, with the Magic Flute project. I mean, this is again an attempt to restart or advance as best they can. Because remember, von Born dies a few months before, right?
Yeah, July, I think, of the summer of 1791.
And he was he had written this book on Masonry, the comparison between the Egyptian rites and but there was a lot of stuff that was going on which was just independent scholarship. It wasn't really Masonic.
Yeah. Born, what else am I going to say about that? That's important. I think Sonnenfels was also a member of that, the guy who wrote the Edict of Toleration for the Emperor. They published two journals. This is 1781, 82, 83 when Born was in charge. It's Zur wahren Eintracht. If I say it a third time, I'll say it differently, I'm sure. But, and then, unlike all of the Masonic groups, because they're just doing public organizing. They publish a Fusion magazine, and they publish a EIR journal, which is meaning they publish a science journal, what their brotherhood is discussing, you know, and they publish a cultural journal, you know, and so there's not to be private secrets.
Right.
So I don't know exactly what Joseph II's involvement with these people were. I know he socialized with them at salons, but I gotta believe this is exactly what he meant in terms of opening up the censorship. Sonnenfels did the cultural one. I'm not sure who. I don't know who was born. I'm not sure who did the science one. Well, yeah, it's probably Born. You're probably right.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I think you're right. So yeah, Born was publishing, was involved in that. Public educationals on this stuff. No secrets here. No hocus pocus.
Did you say earlier that Mozart thought he was being poisoned?
Constanza, his wife, said 30 years later, I think it's a Nissen. Let's take up some of the questions on assassination. That her husband told her in late October 1791, when they were walking in the park, that he feared he was being poisoned. Yes. The son says he was poisoned the way the Pope Ganganelli and Clement XIV had been poisoned.
Wow. And how is that? Is that one documented, the way that Pope was poisoned?
In the Kennedy assassination right now.
What's the actual Salieri role?
Almost unimportant. What did was Beethoven? There's a report to Beethoven in 1823. Salieri slits his throat, or has his throat slit for him, but his throat gets slit, and he's kept in a nut house for the last year or two, a madhouse. He's an old man, and supposedly he confessed to poisoning Mozart. The report's out in the newspapers. Beethoven, in his conversation book, says, this is garbage, it's not true. And mainly, not because it's any particularly pro-Salieri, anti-Salieri position, it's just that, you know, anybody around then of any competence knows this wasn't some personality dispute. The guy reporting it to him was a Jewish composer. Whose name I may remember later.
What kind of attacks was Beethoven taking?
Who reported to Beethoven, you know, he may have poisoned many moments of Mozart's existence, but he did not poison him. Salieri was a guy who was, during the 1780s, was never going to piss off Orsini Rosenberg. You know, he was competent. He was a literate composer. Who asked me earlier today about Salieri? Somebody asked me. Using it? Okay. Who, if you listen to his Axur, A-X-U-R, or Beaumarchais play in Paris. Salieri went to Paris around 1786 and collaborated with Beaumarchais on a play, and it's pretty decent music. And there's some other stuff he does, which is not bad. You can tell he's literate, but you know, it was never. You know, he's probably a rage ball. He was a talented guy who never did anything particularly creative. He could recognize he heard genius, and it probably did piss him off. But whether there's any other psychological components to how he was deployed, you didn't have to. You don't even need it. May well be, but he was the core composer. You had to kiss. He knew how to kiss up to people that Mozart and Beethoven were not going to kiss up to. Beethoven has an interesting composition, In questa tomba oscura, 1806, on the Mozart assassination. You want to sort of get an idea how he dealt with this stuff. There was a poem written in questa tomba oscura by a guy named Carpani, who was the head of the Venetian. He was the Venetian censor. He's not a nice guy. Habsburg agent for a long time. He got tossed to the wolves like Salieri did as an old man, but he was a loyal agent for the Venetian, and he wrote basically anti-Schiller stuff that in aesthetics. I forget how he put it, but it was just directed against Schiller. So he writes this poem, In questa tomba oscura, which is supposedly big rage. It's a very simple little poem about somebody who's died before their time, and you're standing over their grave, and gee, you should have treated them better, but really these are useless tears. forgetting how's the end of the thing end? But Beethoven, there's like 200 settings known about this thing, musical settings of this poem. Mozart's kid sets a setting, Salieri does a setting. You can get a really good clinical profile of these people, how they choose to do this. That the vast majority of them are sort of this useless tears. They're stressing useless tears. We can have a pathetic response. Somebody died before their time, get it out of your system, have a good cry, and forget about it. You know, because it's not going to do you good to have all that stuff welled up in you. And that's the the useless tears. I forget exactly. It's been a long time since I went through this
But
one.
isn't it where he ends it by saying, "You cry for me now, you ungrateful one. Why didn't you care for me while I was alive?"
Yeah, yeah. Ingrata.
Ingrata.
Thank you.
Right.
Ingrata is what
Ingrata
Beethoven
is it.
seizes upon, the ungrateful one. But Beethoven does something very unmusical, you know, at the end. And I sort of, you know, I'm fanatic about looking at this stuff. And you know, it's a soft. The upbeat is piano, and the last note is forte. Ingrata, you know, it's just weird. It's not really particularly musical. It's dramatic. It makes totally dramatic sense. But and so I said, well, what the hell's going on here with this? And you know, I'm convinced that Beethoven is the only one who says there's evil afoot. You know, that's the real issue here. Let's just cut through all the other stuff. You know, Ingrata.
Is there nothing from Haydn about all of this?
Nothing from Haydn?
I'm asking you, in terms of, you know,
Yeah,
because
I
Haydn, of
understand.
course, was there. He survived all this, and he was there with Beethoven afterwards.
I don't know. Haydn, you know, Haydn says a number of things to people. He goes out on a limb when people try to down Mozart or down his reputation. He's very good on that. He's totally loyal. He will not lie about that. But and he works with Baron von Swieten later in the 1790s. Sweeten's a little bit of a broken man, but you know, this is with the creation. So he does. There's some good things. There's probably a lot more to say than what I know about this stuff.
Okay.
But
You said something about how Mozart comes to America. The impact of Mozart actually in America, musically.
I mean, LaRouche.
Yeah, well, before LaRouche. I'm just thinking in terms of, I remember when we began the Schiller celebrations a long
Yeah.
time ago, we discovered all kinds of Schiller companies and whatnot throughout the United States, which
Yeah.
was somewhat of a surprise.
I think we're going to find a lot more on plays than on the music. There's interesting stuff. There's a lot of stuff not known throughout the 19th century, on conservatories, on, you know, poetry. I don't want to divorce the music from all the poetry and the plays, because it is part of a package. But most of the stuff you're going to find about the music, I think you're going to find out from following the poets and the plays.
Well, DuPont
Here, have the hand
dies here. You know.
Yeah. And Susan Bowen is, you can be asked about a lot of the details. I've looked into some of the same stuff. I'm just not as impressed, to be honest with you. I think he's more broken than not. I'm glad he's here, and he does good things with with the New York grouping.
You know, Casa Italia up at Columbia.
On the Italian and the influence on the New York political crowd, and Susan's written some good stuff on that. But in terms of music, it doesn't really come up from that standpoint. No, we have a problem. You know, if you'll be honest, I don't think the flourishing we should
there
have
were
had,
Handel
we
and
haven't
Haydn
had.
societies all over the United States at
Yeah.
that same time. That must have been.
I don't want to downgrade. There's literacy throughout the place. You know, there's a whole level of literacy which just beg for something. You know, like the Poe of the poetry world of American genius in this area. I can tell you a lot of different Americans who went over and studied with Schumann and Brahms and others. You know, there's all sorts of names you can go through and listen to some of their music. Gregory Mason, and there's a bunch of different people.
Did you ever look, speaking of that, into that Louise Ferenc that Pat had mentioned?
No, that is wonderful. You know, that French woman. I play it every time I sit down and start writing something. Actually,
Play what?
it's my happy music.
Yeah.
What is it?
Louise Ferenc, excuse me, former noble. The formerly noble Pat sent me this French woman composer, some of her music from the 1840s.
Mozart.
No.
Oh, should-
No, Mendelssohn's time. 1840s.
She was,
1830s,
yeah, a
40s.
contemporary
And she was
medicine.
known
I
in
think
Paris at the time. She was some delightful music. How do we get up on this? So no, I don't have anything particularly insightful. My basic prejudice is I think it's a revolution undone. I'm not saying there's not a lot of culture throughout the 19th century that was the backbone of what made the country the way it is. And my example of the Haydn Handel societies are key to that. A very good example. Not that I've not looked at it, I just
I think maybe one of the most interesting
What
things.
about the way the Requiem was completed? Like evidently, I don't know, one of the stories I heard was that his wife was heavily in debt, and she went through a whole big rigmarole to get
There's
some.
so many different stories. I'd say the basic thing, just the short answer is, she wasn't that big in debt. She had ways of dealing. That did not force her to do something totally goofy. But I think, the letters do show that she's at some pains to indicate that it was a finished product when she handed it over to Walsegg, that it finished by Mozart. And as over the years, she was on record backing off her story somewhat, saying, well, yeah, we got some help from Zusmeyer and others. The actual manuscript came available in the 1830s. People who do not think Mozart had different scandal stories about it, including Weber, the composer, had some nasty things about that Mozart didn't write, something like that. I forget what it was. But anyhow, it was one of these things that was found 40 years later after Count Walsegg had died, and something about his estate. They found the manuscript, and it's a subject of doctoral dissertation. People know exactly how far Mozart composed in this stuff. Part of the problem is Zusmeyer seemingly faked his handwriting to look like Mozart's. So you get dissertations for trying to figure out this, and another person gets dissertations for figuring out the watermarks, what kind of paper, who used what paper, so they can tweeze apart this little story. It's, the stuff you love is Mozart. There are some, as far as I'm concerned, the literate things, like putting the repeat at the end. What's the, from the beginning, it appears at the end. Yeah, putting the fugue again. Zusmeyer's on record saying later on when the story started unraveling, that, I thought it was a good idea to do this. This is the type of things we were doing. When the story started coming out, he overstated how much he did, how much of the composition he did. So I'm not an expert at this. There are experts on these things. People want to dive into it. There's a copious amount of dissertations on exactly whose pencil marks stopped where.
Well, what's this thing you said, you've referenced twice about a manuscript getting dropped off at somebody's doorstep or something? You made this comment in your presentation.
The manuscript of the Requiem?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll slow up a little bit. The Mozart's commissioned to do a Requiem sometime in 1791 for very good money. And Mozart's interested in the project because he's not, as he puts it, not had the liberty. He's about to become some sort of not a court composer, so church. He's about to get a position where he can have much more liberties in what he gets to write, including church music. And so he's interested in this as one of the big things. Also the Ave Verum, a very short Ave Verum, done in June of 1791. So he's interested in the project. He's interested in for transforming. He is interested in reaching the population at this Schikaneder Theater in German. But he's not uninterested in getting people in the church-going places. He's in full court press. He's going after the whole thing. And the Ave Verum is a short little thing, which is part of. It was after Joseph was dead, but it's part of Joseph's reforms. Joseph did have a policy for the church which said, get rid of all the ornamentation nonsense. There's too much corruption. Let's get the meaning done. And Mozart, in doing the Ave Verum, thought he was giving a model for how you could actually get to the point of what these church words say and mean. And so when the Requiem thing came to him at the same time, he wasn't just the money, he was interested in transforming how Requiems are done. But he's dead before it's finished. So the question is, on the manuscript, Costanza has to fulfill the commission and get the balance of the payment also. And so it's this manuscript that's fought over how much Mozart wrote it, how much was filled in. Does that ring a bell? What as the manuscript you're talking about? The reference to the manuscript?
I guess that's what it is. I just remember you saying something about how a manuscript showed up at someone's door and wasn't sure what you're talking about.
Maybe a mystery unsolved. I don't know. If there's something about that manuscript you want to know, I can go into that.
I'll have to study the tapes.
Yeah, exactly. Study the tapes.
They've already been done.
But I mean, just mention to something else. Kennedy assassination's also there. The biggest smoking pistol on the Mozart assassination is not the wife's comments or the son's comments. There's actually a painting that was made public in 1920s. There's a book on it by Robbins and Landon, 78, 80 pages on one painting. It's a Masonic meeting, about 35, 40 people in it, with Mozart in the little right-hand corner. I think the Robbins and Landon thing's called Mozart and the Masons. I did a review of this in EIR 20 years ago, and it's a bizarre painting. But first of all, the painting comes from the two Tinti brothers. It comes from the Tinti family in 1927. I assume that's the same family in Austria, that Barons von Tinti, the two members of Zawar and Eintracht who played the dissonant quartet and the Haydn quartets with Mozart and Haydn. That's who the quartet was, these four guys. So the Tinti brothers, in 1791, after Mozart dies, they don't come out and say, we think Mozart was killed, but they commission a painting. And I think it's obviously the circumstantial evidence is. And the painting's very interesting because it has Mozart in a corner. There's 35, 40 guys in this painting. Everybody's wearing swords. There's not one sword pointed at anybody except one right at Mozart's back. And Robbins Landon doesn't see, in a 70-page book, can't figure out in his astute analysis of exactly who everybody is in the painting. Can't figure out there's a sword right at Mozart's back. And the guy, it's the guy, supposedly the sword's at the back because it's on the guy reaching up to get the curtains. And Robbins Landon's comment is, this guy is opening the curtains on the Masonic meeting. But it's more likely this guy Hoffman, it's more likely he was closing. He was trying to close you can't tell he's opening or closing. He just got his hand on the drapes, and Robbins Landon making his comment, got a sword here, Mozart sitting down here with that sword at his back. So you can say it's an accident. But this guy, Leopold Alois Hoffmann, is the Pergin agent who, in 1784, tried to keep Mozart out of the Zawar and Eintracht Lodge, who was kicked out of the lodge because of that, rejoined a lodge in Czechoslovakia, and then came back into Vienna. Evidently, I don't know all his perambulations.
That's the artist was one of these guys?
No, this is the guy they're painting. In the painting.
Oh, wow.
A lodge brother in 1791. So it's a composed painting, not say it's a snapshot. It's a composed painting after Mozart's dead of somebody saying, I can't change the situation right now, but I'll be damned if I'm going to leave this story in my grave. In 1927, he got into the Austrian National Library or something like that.
This stuff is so critical about Peregrine and the whole story of the Queen's Necklace and what have you, because this is what we're living through right now in terms of what Neil Gallagher talks about and the kinds of things that happen to his friends. All of a sudden they say, Neil, you're a great guy and I really love you, but I'm going to stab you in the back. And what happened to the Clintons and all of this stuff. How they operate in these horrible ways to turn people.
Well, two things. One, I mean, the world never should have gone this way. It's not normal that we had an American Revolution, and a couple hundred years later, we have a world half slave and half free, or more than. Yeah.
But people don't understand.
It never should have gone down that way.
It gets into this question of sense certainty. Because, you know, you talk to people about what's going on and what have you, and they have no idea how the world
Well, that's the
really
second
works.
thing. So, but that's what these compositions do. Whether we talk about Mozart's operas, but the enemy does not have the winning position. You know, to the extent people really wrap themselves around truth and beauty, and whether or not they're actually connected or not, whether they just want to hope that they're connected. You know, does beauty? You know, I've always been told with this. Can they trust your emotions? How do you develop your emotions? Therein lies the power. And when we organize people, we're doing those little Mozart operas. You know, and the enemy cannot be. And yeah, they can kill. The only tragedy. What does Cornelius Gallagher say? The only problem was, I went in. You got to go in with an army. I went in there with myself, and he's. My way of thinking, he's not unhappy that he did it. You know. How did we meet him, Elliot? Was this Abscam Pride Life?
No, actually, we met him when Al Douglas called him up.
Okay.
And Al recruited him, signed him up to EIR. And then sometime soon after that, Mike Leppick met him at the airport. Mike, back there?
Yeah, that's an experience. Okay.
Wasn't he thrown in prison in between the time
Yeah, he was in
he
prison.
signed up?
Yeah, no, he was in prison after he was thrown out of Congress, early on, 73, 74. Mike still there or not?
He left.
Oh, Mike told us all the story about this. That, I mean, Neil was a subscriber to EIR, so he came up to Mike at the airport. He was...
That how long ago?
77 or 78 or 79, sometime in there. And he said two things to Mike. One is, you guys have the best intelligence I've seen outside of the Congress, or something like that. So he's very, very struck by EIR. But then he said to Mike, you'll never win. You can't beat them. And Neil said to us when we saw him a month ago, he said, I was so mad at your guy that I hit him.
Slugged him.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But
That's what
Mike
he said.
denies that he was slugged.
Did Mike do something goofy in front of him?
Well,
No,
Mike said
no.
Neil looked extremely defeated.
Yeah.
Neil told us he was very angry.
Yeah.
He was angry. Mike said he looked crushed.
Yeah.
In any case, Mike said that and Neil said, the guy was real nasty to me and made me angry, so I hit him. Mike says, I probably was nasty when he said you can't beat him. I probably told, who are you?
Mike might have said something.
Yeah, you can see Mike doing that.
Yeah. I heard Mike doing it.
Right. Of course.
Okay.
That's how we met him.
All right. It's interesting. So yeah, it's a very interesting point. Do we always have to go through this endless cycle of assholes knocking off key people? Well, we do if we keep on just doing it with one key person.
Right, right. But people have to understand how the oligarchy works also.
And have fun with, you know.
Yeah, that's right, and how to find them.
But I think the other thing that's important about it, because I'm reading Jim Garrison's book, the thing that's so interesting is that some of this coming out now, this is the story of our movement. As
Exactly.
amazing it is with Mozart, we are in that same role now. That's what's exciting.
So if I didn't say it clearly enough at the presentation this afternoon, I really do think the bizarre circumstance that, even though I didn't want to come to this conclusion, that Mozart knew he was dying and made a very deliberate choice of what gift he was going to leave. And people should.
What was it? What did you say? You made a deliberate
People
choice?
made a very deliberate choice over the gift that he was going to leave. That's why I read the little quote about the Kusa, about the generations yet unseen. And that's us.
Well, he also decided not to go to London.
Yep.
Not, sort of like, you know, it's like Kennedy. Kennedy knew he was going to be killed. He talked about it in 1961. He used to talk to Thomas Merton about it.
Yep.
Lincoln knew that he could be killed. He gave the speech at Independence Hall about it.
No, the Mozart thing when I discovered, I was very uncomfortable about these letters in late 1786 when he's heading out of town.
Right.
But it reminded me of Rosa Parks. The thing that people don't really... I grew up near a place called Highlander Center in Tennessee, where folks were friends with a guy named Miles Horton that ran this labor and civil rights training center. It's where We Shall Overcome, other things came out of there. But Rosa Parks was educated there in the summer before she stood up on the bus, sat down on the bus, excuse me. And the amazing thing is not that she was educated there that summer. the previous spring, they had another 18-year-old young black woman who wanted to fight the case, but the leadership would not fight it because she was pregnant, and they would not fight it. So they had a more respectable woman. They sent up to a couple of FDR Democrats, also friends, Virginia Dorr, I forget her husband's name, down in Montgomery, sent Rosa up to really just, as Bevel used to put it, just to have white and black people talk together was have a normal conversation, already broke the rules, and that's the main thing you learn, that you can actually live in a republic. So anyhow, the amazing thing that reminded me of the Mozart is Rosa did not go back in September and do that. She agonized for several months. You know, she thought, maybe I shouldn't do this. And then she decided it was much more deliberate. It was nothing impetuous. You know, and Mozart went through his own little trial, and I was nervous about this because I like Mozart. And I didn't like this guy, you know, acting cheesy. But, you know, it was a very conscious decision in February of 1787 that, okay, if the leadership is totally fucked up, then I don't know how it's going to end up, but we got to go after this.
It's like Furtwängler too, sticking through it.
Interesting character. Yeah, so that's all you need to know about Mozart.
And all you'll ever know.
Could you recap the beginning?
The slightest idea. I did at the beginning. I said we take all questions later that I didn't like. That's how I remember about the beginning.
All right, so we'll have to have a rehearsal again so we can get you to do part two.
These rehearsals can be dangerous. You know, I came last night. I had to play. Just tell people my second favorite concert of the last 5 or 10 years, professional concert. We played Brahms' Fourth Symphony, Schumann Piano Concerto, and Mozart's Magic Flute Overture, McLean Orchestra out in Washington suburb last night. So all this week I've had Brahms' Fourth going through my head. So rehearsals I sort of like right now. I'm very big on that. You can get me. Oh, I remember what. But our schedule was totally wacko, and there's no good reason we should have taken this last. Nancy and I should have taken this last job because we were just going crazy. The last Friday and Saturday we did 3 weddings, 2 orchestra rehearsals, and the concert. You know, and I. Anyhow, we never should have jammed it up. And as we were driving home late at night from these rehearsals, we were loving it. We were just beat and going, why is this happening? And then the answer was always in Brahms' Fourth. And you get it's a rare opportunity you get on this stuff. So, and similar with the Requiem rehearsals, you can bribe me on it.
That's what the professional musicians were saying.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that's what I talked
you
to
do
some
this,
of
I'll
that.
be there.
Yeah.
Oops, sorry.
Yeah.
The musicians in the back on
Yeah.
the wind players.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was having trouble, but this is worth it. This is Mozart's Requiem. In Mozart, we know, had Mendelssohn's Phaedon work. He was living in the Arnstein household in Vienna, a Jewish household, and the Arnsteins were from Mrs. Arnstein was from Berlin, from the famous Aeschylus family of collaborators of Moses Mendelssohn, and she brought the works down. So this whole question of relooking at Christians and Jews and Muslims from a higher standpoint was very much wrapped up in whether you could do something better than the old imperial blood vendettas and other things. Good. So having said that,
What did you say about, what did Mozart do with the Phaedon?
we just know that he had his copy of the Phaedon from the Aeschylus daughter, the Arnstein, from the family that he was living with during the time that he was getting the balls to flip the ending.
When did Mendelssohn publish the Phaedon?
1769,
Okay.
I think, or 1770. What's that?
Mozart.
Mozart had a copy. From, hand delivered from a collaborator of Mendelssohn. This will come together. So Gunther is the aide to the emperor working with Mozart 3 weeks before the opera is supposed to open for the Grand Duke Paul's visit, and to upset their whole, go after the Turks policy. Mozart and Gunther are meeting, having a long dinner, evening meeting. The next morning, Gunther is arrested by the secret police. The emperor's right-hand man is arrested the morning after the meeting with Mozart, like June 28th of 1782. and the opera's opening up in the middle of July. Also arrested is his mistress, Eleanor Aeschylus, from the same grouping as the Arnsteins and the Mendelssohn crowd. The charges, they're Prussian spies, which really meant almost nothing. In Austria and Prussia fought a war. Had done some fighting, so. But they just threw a charge out, a Prussian spy. It was all malarkey. But what it really meant is they're the agents of Moses Mendelssohn here in Vienna. That's what it meant. Gunther was in jail for in prison for several months. He was gotten out. This becomes jumping ahead again, but the only reason we know these stories, it was all in the secret police files, what happened, until in 1790 when Joseph II dies and his brother succeeds him, Leopold, the one that the Clemenza de Tito is done for. He fires the head of the secret police, the guy who had all these files, and opens up this stuff and investigates what the hell messed up my brother. And that's the only reason we know some of these stories about this. It would have been buried like so many other stories we don't know about. So this very tense situation, agitated situation at the opera, is done. The problem is, I mean, the general point I was trying to make about the Requiem is that I feel awkward even saying it. I didn't really want the research to come down this way because there's so many weird ways people take it. But Mozart knew he was being poisoned, and he made a choice for our generation, for future generations, you know, what he was going to leave at that point. And it has nothing to do with any bogus story about a mysterious stranger and delivering the Requiem. I'll say as a side note, I mean, the commission for the Requiem came from a guy who ran a mining operation. I think his name was Balsek, about 30 miles out of Vienna. And he had a business office in Vienna. And the guy who ran the business office was in Mozart circles, close to a friend of Mozart's, who probably suggested, you know, that this Count Balsek stop hiring also runs to write music for him, which he had a habit of doing. He would hire people to, you know, he's a nice guy, but he liked having composers compose music, which he would then pass off as his own at his little quartet sessions at his house. If you're a count, you could do that. But so the friend probably said, you know, I can't prove it, but it's a very natural course of events that could have accounted for how the commission came to Mozart. So there's no spooky thing here. It's just literally Mozart in September of 1791 was the leading political figure in Europe, surpassing Lafayette at that point. And partly because of something I do want to spend a little time on. What was happening with the Magic Flute, the opera that he was wildly successful in Vienna among the German-speaking population. On this question that if you can have, if people are really serfs and just trained animals, they really cannot experience love in any form, you know, and therefore, or if you're saying, well, they're just serfs and they just have a moment where they get to have some love, it's like saying they get to have some church on Sunday. It's not the case. If people can actually feel something universal about some other person, they're capable of being educated to rule. They have what it takes to be educated to rule. And the Magic Flute put that thing so powerfully. We'll come back to that. So that's what I'd like to get across in terms of. So then, Mozart's expression that to his wife in 3rd or 4th week of October, 6 weeks before he died, that he was being poisoned, it doesn't have to be the ravings of a madman. Mozart knew what he was doing, and all his actions for the previous documentable, the religious overtones. 1783 was going to be the 100th anniversary of the massive, I forget who won. Is it Lepanto?
Yeah,
There's
Lepanto.
Lepanto in 1683. Oh, I got a church history guy here. Who won that one?
Spanish one, isn't it?
All right. So there's going to be a big 100-year commemoration with a lot of anti-Arab stuff going on. So Mozart changing the end of the opera to make the Pasha the most Christian person on the scene is really, it warranted all the rioting that went on in the opera house, not in the town in general, as far as I know. And the change, maybe going, there's a similar story in Berlin, in the Prussian court, in Paris. There's probably Stockholm, I just don't know all the other. I know in detail, in Paris, Berlin, and Vienna, it's absolutely the case that the American Revolution in the fall, winter of 1781 and the spring of 1782, extraordinary steps were being taken, openings being given on the question of it's time to really be sane and get some decent policies. Moses Mendelssohn's the figure mainly attached to this in Berlin, and the reason I just thought about it was because Mozart in Vienna is around some of Mendelssohn's circles in Vienna. Mendelssohn's, part of the reforms that Joseph did in October 19th of 1781 was that Jews and Protestants could be citizens in the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but they had to, and run their own schools, but they had to meet certain standards, and that included learning German. Mendelssohn's German translation of the Bible, of the Hebrew Bible, became the major center point of the Jewish communities in the Austro-Hungarian Empire that wanted to go support what the emperor was doing and push and saw hope and progress in this. And in Vienna in particular, an advisor to Joseph II, a man named Sonnenfels, grandson of a rabbi, but he was a Christian, was the guy who authored these reforms. This sort of becomes important because the emperor assigns his close aide, the emperor's aide, Gunther, to work with Mozart in the forming up of this opera, The Abduction from the Seraglio. 3 weeks before the opera is supposed to open, so the ending of the opera, the change is very much modeled on sort of the ending that Lessing had done, a friend of Mendelssohn's, the writer Lessing, and a couple years earlier in his writing the Nathan the Wise about a Jew, a Christian, and a Muslim. I won't go through that, but it's one of these sort of surprise things which usefully upsets people's prejudices. And the courts of Europe, that the American Revolution is really out just to cut off the heads of kings, and it's a secret, pagan, atheistic operation. There was nothing much to it. It was the Bavarian state police who made it a big issue in this period right before Figaro. And this is what Joseph was having to deal with. Joseph, in the period from, actually I'm getting ahead of myself on that, so we'll come back to that. So just in 1781-82, the news of Yorktown has excited Europe. Mozart has joined what John Sigurdsson referred to as Baron von Swieten seminars, where they're getting intense work on Johann Sebastian Bach's works. Baron von Swieten is a minister. He's Minister of Education, which is an important issue at the time because you can trace the American Revolution faction as the group that's not allowing the Jesuits to run the education anymore. You now need educated citizenry, serious education, people who can learn science, and that's not what was going on underneath the Jesuits. So the Jesuits had been banned in 1773. The Pope who banned them died the next year suspiciously. This jumps ahead of the story again. I'm going to do this all evening. But Karl Mozart, one of the main things about the question of Mozart's assassination is the son, Karl Mozart, says many years later, after Mozart's dead, that his father died the same way Pope Ganganelli died, which is Clement XIV, the Pope who banned the Jesuits. which, whatever the medical evidence involved in it, that's not the point. It's just a famous whispered case among Republicans that the Jesuits got the Pope who banned them. And Schiller has some interesting references to this in The Ghost Seer. So trying to keep on point here. That would be a struggle. It's an important matter. Baron von Spieden's an important post on education if you're going to build up something approximating a republic, even if it's under a king or an emperor. Joseph II has Mozart appointed to do this abduction from the Seraglio. It's for the occasion, an opera from a previous play. It's for the occasion of the, who's the Russian prince? Paul or? Who's the empress name? Catherine? Catherine. The son of Paul, I think is his name. He's on one of these tours of Europe. And he's partly involved in trying to wangle, in 1782, whether it's him personally or the advisors around him, they're trying to forget the American Revolution. Let's go back to business as usual. It's time to fight the Turks. Just empire stuff. It was a senseless war to try to get Russia and Austria to join together to fight the Turks. The previous 10 years are pretty exciting in that regard. So I made it just go through a little, not quite as fast a treatment of some of the points along the way. But what I did not say about the beginning, 1781 is when Mozart comes to Vienna. And there's a big fight around not just the emperor, but every court in Europe about the American Revolution. And you won't find it written up too much, but it's the case. And when I say American Revolution, the policies of the American Revolution, whether we can continue, as the Rostro puts it, in the Magic Flute, whether you continue having the brotherhood the way it's been run, or whether or not, in fact, it has to be a man and a woman that rules it jointly. It's not a trivial matter. It's not a woman's rights thing either. And this is sort of an issue. This is really brought to a head in October with the Yorktown victory in October 1781, which the news reaches Europe about 3 weeks later, and it's pretty shocking. That same October 19th, on the surrender of Cornwallis's army, it just happens. It's just an accident, but Mozart's Emperor Joseph II issues his edicts of toleration for the Protestants and the Jews. He's been doing a series of reforms in 1781 and 82 involving what I said about freeing the serfs. The key figure, one of the key figures, sort of the Benjamin Franklin figure in Vienna, is a fellow named Ignaz von Born, B-O-R-N, who Joseph II, who's the model for Zoroastro, who's the head of a particular Freemasonic lodge, who's a mineralogist, a metallurgist, an inventor, a geologist. He's given major public honors by Joseph II for his work in metallurgy and his contribution to the state in those works. I guess I should stop on, when I say Freemasons, most of it's harmless, some of it's evil, and one or two identifiable parts of it, having really nothing to do with Freemasonry, is what Mozart's involved with. My German won't do this very well, but zur wahren Eintracht, the true path, is the particular group that Mozart joins with. And it's just an American Revolution group. It's a little bit off the side, but everything if you ever heard this stuff about the Illuminati, that's just a bunch of crap from a group run by Adam Weishaupt in 1770, which was said to be started in 1776 by the Bavarian State Police, who wanted it to be started in 1776, and this comes up in 1784. They arrest this poor schmuck and accuse him of all sorts of things, and it becomes something to push in the faces